I will be putting up scriptures on the screen, so that'll be fine if you want to watch the screen and help keep up. But if you match it with your Bible, I am skipping some of the verses, trying to focus the lesson a little bit, bring out some points that hopefully will be beneficial to all of us today. I will also be pulling verses from other places, and so again, having them on the screen make it easier to jump around as needed. But for the most part, I'm going to be following in John chapter 11. This is a lesson about the power of God. Of course, we can see that as Jesus is going to raise a person who has died. It's also a lesson about the love of God. In fact, that's really the key. It's more important. We know God has the power. He's already raised several other people at this time in the story. But the love is something that's more easily overlooked. And I hope that we will be able to dig in a little bit this morning and see more things about the love of God. So what is this story about? Well, of course, we start with the principal characters, Lazarus himself, and his two sisters, Mary and Martha. Lazarus is a very good friend. Well, all three of them are close friends and followers of Jesus. And they live in a town called Bethany. That's very close, only about 2 miles from Jerusalem. Today, with a large city like Jerusalem, you don't even think of a town being 2 miles away. They just kind of blend together. Well, in this situation, first thing, it's much longer to go when people walk. They can't just drive in 2 miles and go just a couple of minutes. But walking, it took half hour to walk that. And it's a little harder. There's a valley. Jerusalem itself is on a high hill, and then there's a steep valley in between, and then it comes up the other side, maybe not as high, but still another incline to an area where there is the town of Bethany. Also, the Garden of Gethsemane is right near there. So this is all in a very familiar area for us. Let's take a look shortly at a map. This is, of course, all of Palestine area. This would be the area that Jesus taught in. If we zoom in a little bit and focus on around the area of Jerusalem and Bethany, they are very close. We're going to back up a little bit and see that Jesus has planned what's going to happen. Jesus knows what will be needed. And Jesus is setting himself up for this story by positioning himself very carefully in an area across the river. So he's detached from the area close to Bethany. And we're going to be talking about how all of these things came together. And you will see not only the power of God to do miracles, but the power of God to know the future and to control the events that happen so that things come together and accomplish what God wants. Let's back up a little bit and set the stage for this story. Back up, about 6 months, maybe 7, 8 months. Jesus is still in Galilee at this time, and it says in John chapter 7 that Jesus walked in Galilee, for he did not want to walk in Judea because the Jews were looking to kill him. Now the Jews' feast of the tabernacles was at hand, and his brothers therefore said to him, "Depart from here and go to Judea, that your disciples can see the work that you are doing. For no one who does anything in secret while himself wants to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world." And then John adds a comment, "For even his brothers did not believe in him." The point Jewish leaders have already become angrily militant against Jesus. And the Feast of the Tabernacles is one of the feasts in the law of Moses, where the Jews were to come together and worship God at a big feast. All observant Jews would go to Jerusalem for that. Well, at the time of Jesus, there were many Jews who lived very far away. It was not possible to go to Jerusalem 3 times a year. God intended for the Jews to stay in their homeland, but due to sin, that's another story, many Jews were spread. So people have become used to the idea that many people don't go to the feasts all the time. A little bit like people getting used to the idea that you don't have to go to church all the time. Just once in a while is good enough. But an observant Jew is going to go. And so now they're seeing Jesus. And the brothers are saying, we know that the Jewish leaders are against you. We know they want to kill you. Hey, Jesus, are you going to Jerusalem for the feast? I think there's a tender point here that the brothers who don't yet believe in Jesus are acting like brothers. They're goading Jesus on. Hey, Jesus, why don't you go to Jerusalem? Knowing how dangerous that is for him. Jesus responds back to them. He said, oh, my time is not yet, but your time is always ready. Jesus knew. The priests do want to kill him, but they're not going to kill him now because it's not the right time. Oh, but you brothers, I mean, you don't have a specific time. You could die any time. So Jesus gave it back to them as well. It is a little hard sometimes to fit stories from one of the Gospels into the timeline of another Gospel. But in this case, I believe that the Gospel of Luke is adding more to this story. And specifically, in Luke, Jesus is traveling through Samaria from Galilee to Jerusalem. And so that's why I believe this is talking about the same time. Jesus is now traveling to Jerusalem. And Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he has something very serious, something very heavy on his heart that he needs to tell to the apostles. He says, now let these words sink down into your ears, for the Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men. Also, it says in Luke chapter 9 that now it came to pass that when the time had come for him, Jesus, to be received up, that he had steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem. He's already on the trip. Read Luke 9. He's already going. Jesus has left Galilee, not with his brothers and family, but he's left Galilee privately in a small group, headed to Jerusalem for the feast that was part of the law of Moses. Jesus is going, but he's going privately. And there's something heavy on his heart that he's going to be betrayed. And then he sets his face steadfastly. It's kind of an odd expression today. He's determined. He's focused. Jesus is beginning to prepare his apostles to be ready for what's coming. It's going to be a shock, and they're not ready for this. Jesus himself is dreading what is going to happen. Both what's going to happen to himself, and he's also dreading and nervous about what's going to happen to the apostles and the disciples when they see what happens. So Jesus is decisive. It's done, it's chosen, we're doing it, we're moving on. And he's going to Jerusalem. Jesus does arrive in Jerusalem and for the Feast of the Tabernacles, and he begins teaching in the temple. He went there separately in a small, private group, not publicly where people would see him. People were wondering, is he coming or not coming? And he gets there, what does he do? Goes in the temple? So he's there in front of all the people and he's teaching. And that's exactly what is offending the Jewish leaders. So Jesus is down here for the feast and he's teaching, and the teaching is infuriating the priests. It says, Jesus said to them, the priests are challenging him, "Most assuredly I say to you, before Abraham was, I am." I am. That's kind of an odd way to say that's me or something. That is just a borrowed expression. It's I am is, in Greek, it's a copy of the Hebrew word Yahweh. That's the divine name for God. The Jews were in the habit, they would never say that name, that word. And when they were reading the Bible, they would substitute something like Lord or Almighty or something. If they're reading the Old Testament and the name Yahweh is there, they would not voice the word. It was too holy to speak it. Jesus not only spoke it, he applied it to himself. I mean, this is swearing in their opinion, their feeling. And Jesus is blaspheming God in the worst way, speaking his name and applying it to himself. Then they took up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, going through the midst of them, and so he passed by. The Jewish leaders are infuriated, and Jesus slips away. Jesus is there teaching in the temple. And soon we have in John 10, now it was the Feast of Dedication in Jerusalem, and it was wintertime, and Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. Jesus is still teaching in Jerusalem about 2 months later, from the Feast of the Tabernacles to the Feast of Dedication. It's about 2 months. It's the Feast of Dedication is what we know today by the Hebrew name Hanukkah. Hanukkah is not explained in the Old Testament. It was something that was developed later after the Old Testament was closed. But it was active at the time of Jesus, and Jesus was there for Hanukkah. Still there at the temple teaching in Jerusalem, while the priests are angry and looking for an opportunity to catch and kill Jesus. And then the Jews took up stones again to stone him. And Jesus answered them, "Many good works I have shown you from my Father. For which of these good works do you stone me?" And the Jews answered him, saying, "Not for good work that you're doing, but for blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself to be God." Yes, the priests understood perfectly clear that Jesus was claiming to be the Son of God. Jesus was saying he was the Messiah. Some people seem to misunderstand or deny that Jesus claimed to be the Son of God or the Messiah. Not true. The Jewish leaders knew it. They knew he was saying he was the Messiah, and they were ready to kill him and stone him. If it's not true, it's blasphemy. If it is true, he deserves worship. Which is it going to be? Things are getting very tense with the Jewish priests. Many of the common people believe in Jesus, and a few of the priests are sympathetic, but the so opposed to him, and they threaten anyone who would support Jesus. Again, they're threatening to stone Jesus for blasphemy. Therefore they, the priests, sought again how to seize him, but he escaped from their hand. And he went away again, and beyond the Jordan, he went to a place where John was baptizing at first, and there he stayed. Jesus was in full control. Jesus was there teaching for 2 months, probably 3 months about during this time, and the priests were getting angry. They, at least 2 times, literally picked up stones to kill him. And Jesus slips away. But enough of that. This isn't the time. It's not the right way for Jesus to have his sacrifice. And so Jesus slips away, and Jesus avoids further conflict for a while by crossing the river. He's now separated. He's not near Jerusalem. He's separated by the river Jordan. And Jesus is out there teaching. And then we turn the page. John chapter 11. Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, of the same town as Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair, and whose brother Lazarus was sick. How did we get from this story about Jesus teaching in the temple, and then Jesus crossing the river to teach, and now we're talking about a man who got sick? It seems like the story is off the point. It's not related. No, this story is key. This story, this event at this time was specifically on purpose. Jesus is getting ready, getting his apostles. This is really for the apostles. Getting ready for the crucifixion that would come. Lazarus is sick, therefore the sisters sent to Jesus, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. When Jesus heard that, he said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Jesus is off teaching on the other side of the Jordan, but his good friends know exactly how to find him. He separated himself from the priest, but somehow Mary and Martha know how to find him, and they have sent word to him. Jesus himself is bracing for the showdown of the century, of the ages. He's getting ready for what's going to happen to himself, and he's getting his apostles ready for what they are going to experience as well. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, and so when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 days in the place where he was, and after this, he said to his disciples, let us go to Judea again. Everything that's happening here is to set up a lesson for the disciples. Their faith is going to be tested to the breaking point, and Jesus is going to show them his power. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews sought to stone you, and you're going there again? The disciples know that the priests are seriously trying to kill Jesus. And they, of course, they could get caught up in that too. They could be killed. Jesus said to them, our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I may wake him up. Then his disciples said, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get well. However, Jesus spoke about his death, but they thought he was talking about out taking a rest and sleep. Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go to him. Here we see the purpose of this story. Why did it happen? Why is it in the Bible? This is the purpose of the story. Jesus was not there when Lazarus got sick, and very sick, and died. He not only was not there when he died, he was far away for them to send word to get him, and then time for him to come back to see him. Interestingly, it doesn't show any second person coming to say, oh, Jesus, never mind, Lazarus has died, finished. He says that Jesus knew that Lazarus was dead. The apostles have seen Jesus raise a dead person before, and Jesus has told them that he himself will be killed. But soon, the apostles are going to see their Lord on the cross, die on the cross, and be laid in a tomb. They're not ready for that. I love this response. Thomas of the apostles said, let us go also, that we may die with him. The apostles aren't foolish. They know that the priests are looking for your opportunity to kill Jesus, and killing the people with him would be no obstacle. They would kill anybody that was in the way. And if they thought these people would support Jesus or carry on the ministry without Jesus, then the apostles would all be the first ones to be arrested. They know what's happening. Thomas said, Jesus is going, we're going to go with him. Whatever happens will happen, and it's going to happen with us, with Jesus. That's a loyalty that must really have been a little bit of inspiration to Jesus. Up until now, what have we heard? Jesus has been listening to mocking by his faithless brothers. He's been listening to threats from the blasphemous priests. And he's been listening to objections from his immature apostles. Now, one of his apostles says, whatever happens to Jesus, I'm going with him, and it'll happen to me too. Thomas does not deserve his nickname of Doubting Thomas. Thomas was no more doubting than any of the other apostles, and he certainly was no less committed. So that is not a fair name to give to Thomas. Moving on. Jesus arrives now in Bethany. Remember, Bethany's only 2 miles from Jerusalem. He's now in the back door of the priest's area. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. The Jewish customs were a little different at this time. It was very important to bury a dead person right away, immediately. However, the funeral, as we would call it, would continue for several days or even weeks or even longer. Martha now, 4 days after her brother has died, is accepted. Her brother is dead. But even still, she seems to have a glimmer of hope, but not an expectation of what Jesus is going to do. Jesus says to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha says to him, oh, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus has just said the exact words that Martha wants to hear. Her brother has died. Lord, if you were here, he wouldn't have died. but I know that God will give whatever you want. And Jesus said, your brother will live again. Well, that's too much to believe, too much to hope for. I must translate that to some spiritual meaning. Oh, yes, I know there's resurrection in the last day, that Lazarus will rise again. Well, first, that's very honorable that Martha believed and understood that there will be a resurrection. There's been a lot of discussion about that. And she's accepting and believes. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Martha said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is come into the world. Amen. Wow, Martha has a lot of spiritual growth, a lot of spiritual insight for her situation. And Jesus wept. Jesus is walking to his own crucifixion. Jesus knows what's coming. Jesus knows he is going to the persecution where he's going to be stripped and beaten and scourged and mocked and then publicly hung on a cross to die at a main road into Jerusalem. Jesus knows that he is going to be separated from the Father for the only time in all of eternity. But right now, Jesus is with Martha. And he sees the grief, and he asks, where have you laid him? And they said to him, well, come and see. And Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how much he loved him. Jesus had other things on his mind. Jesus was with Martha and Mary and other friends who were there mourning the loss of their dear friend Lazarus. Jesus shares the pain of his friends. All of this is happening for their good, but it still hurts. And Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. The apostles have seen Jesus heal the sick, the lame, the deaf, the blind. They have seen Jesus raise somebody who had recently died while the body was still fresh. And those miracles were all in the past. And they were done for other people. What has Jesus done for them recently and for me? A miracle that they will need to remember in just a few more days. I even wonder, when they first opened the tomb and rolled away the stone, did they smell the stench of death? If they did, it was forgotten when they saw Lazarus come out alive. Jesus had the power that doesn't matter how long he's been in the grave. It doesn't matter how bad it stinks. It doesn't matter how stiff he has become. Lazarus is dead. Lazarus is very dead. And Jesus raised him anyway. One way when reading the Bible to learn what's the point did believed in him. Just a short sentence. Yes, Jesus raised a man who was very dead, and they believed in him. But some of the people went away to the Pharisees, and they told them the things that Jesus did. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered together a council and said, "What shall we do? For this man works many signs. And if we let him alone like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away our place and our nation." The witnesses to this miracle saw the same thing. Some of them believed. Others grew stubborn and began to conspire against Jesus. What makes the difference? Why did some believe and others become stubborn? They saw the same miracle. What's the difference? For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Those who love God and want God will grow stronger during our trials, and we see God's love and power everywhere. Those who love and want worldly wealth become angry when trials and become stubborn against God. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth or rust destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And we know that all things will work together for good for those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Some people wish, even pretend, that they live in a time of miracles. These people are forgetting that the people who lived in the time of miracles could not see how all of this was going to work out. God was still teaching them, but we have God's word today. We know how those stories ended. We know how everything is going to come out. Let's just trust God in our lives while we live for him every day. To conclude, this story teaches us that sometimes love hurts. Lazarus had to die to be an example and a lesson for all of these disciples. But when we hurt, God hurts with us. Amen. Whatever you're feeling, God knows. And God shared. If you have righteous hurt, if you have righteous sadness or joy, God's there with you. God's sharing in that. And in the end, God will make it work out. Lazarus was raised from the dead. May God help us to see the power of his love and also to see the love in his power. Everything we read, you could see God planning it and directing it right through every last detail. God still knows what's happening in your life. And with that, I'd like to offer an invitation. If there are any here who have never been baptized, not become part of the Lord's body, now is the time. You don't faith. Sometimes this is a private thing that you need to take care of. You need to address it with God. But we are here to help. We are the church family. And we're here. We can pray for you, we can serve you and help you in any way. Please let your needs be known by coming forward.